will cease interjecting immediately. Questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. On election day last year, the Prime Minister promised in newspapers around the country that if elected he would cut power bills by $275 every year.
Order.
Prime Minister, power prices are rising rapidly for millions of households and small businesses right now. Can the Prime Minister provide a single example of any family or business who has seen the promised $275 reduction in their power bill?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, of course, the budget papers show that under the energy price relief plan that we've put in place, retail electricity price increases in 2023-2024 are now expected to be around 25 percentage points smaller, and retail gas price increases around 16 percentage points smaller than expected prior to the government's interventions. Now, we partnered with state and territory governments to deliver up to $3 billion of electricity price relief for over 5 million households and over 1 million small businesses. Now, those opposite, of course, voted against this plan. They voted against this price relief, and the companies that are involved have all said, to quote Origin Energy, a statement of the Stock Exchange, forward wholesale electricity prices have reduced, and this is expected to have a positive impact on consumer tariffs. That's what they had to say. But of course, those opposite, who apparently are unaware of the Russian illegal invasion of Ukraine and what has happened.
Order. The member for Dunkley will cease interjecting and the Prime Minister will pause. The Minister for Resources will cease interjecting. So I can hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, it's a very specific question. The point of order is on relevance. The promised $275 cut to power bills, not what he desperately tried to do later to cover up the fact that he didn't deliver on his promise.
The question was about, on election day, promises to cut power bills, about power prices that are rising. The Prime Minister is talking about the cost of energy and prices. So for the clarity of the House, he is being relevant to the question. And I give him the call to continue. To be heard in silence.
Mr Speaker, to quote the Australian Energy Regulator, Claire Savage, the Chair, forward-based futures prices for electricity initially stabilised during the early part of 2023 and remain well below levels observed in 2022. The fact is that what we put in place has been effective, that they voted against. They voted against price caps when it came to gas and when it came to coal being generated by New South Wales and Victoria, and they voted against $3 billion of energy price relief.
Order.
They voted against it.
They voted against it. Cease interjecting.
Therefore, higher prices. Wherefore, being prepared to have government intervention in order to make a difference.
The member for Banks. There's far too much noise coming from my left, from the front bench. It's been happening all week. If it continues, people won't be warned. They'll just remove. Question time, I have to hear the answers, the questions in silence and also the answers in silence. You've had a pretty good go this week. If it continues, people will just automatically leave. Hope everyone's clear on that. The call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Health. How will changes to Medicare announced in the budget make it easier for Australians to see a doctor? Why is this investment needed?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank my friend, the member for Gilmore. She's such a fierce advocate for better health care in her beautiful community on the south coast of New South Wales, which we all know has been through so much over the last 3.5 years. She knows that after 9 years of cuts and neglect to Medicare by those opposite, it's never been harder to see a doctor than it is right now, and it's never been more expensive.
Order.
She's seen bulk billing rates come down. She's seen gap fees rise in her community, as they have in all of our communities, which of course has been no accident after 9 long years of government by a Liberal Party that has such a long history of opposition to Medicare in general and to bulk billing in particular. We remember, Mr Speaker, John Howard describing bulk billing as an absolute rort. We remember the Leader of the Opposition in his first budget trying to abolish bulk billing altogether and make every single Australian pay a GP tax every time they visited a doctor. And we remember, Mr Speaker, when we were able to block that infamous GP tax in the other place, he started a 6-year-long freeze to Medicare rebates that ripped billions of dollars out of general practice. Well, Mr Speaker, we have a different approach on this side. We want to strengthen Medicare, not strangle it. Instead of freezing Medicare rebates, our budget 2 weeks ago delivered the biggest increase to indexation in more than 30 years, since Paul Keating was a Prime Minister. A bigger increase to Medicare rebates across the board, Mr Speaker, than was delivered in 7 long years under those opposite. A period of 7 years that encompassed the entire time the Leader of the Opposition was Health Minister, the entire time the Deputy Liberal Leader was Health Minister, and the first 4 years of Greg Hunt's time as Health Minister, more in 1 year than those 7 long years. Mr Speaker, Labor regards bulk billing as the beating heart of Medicare, the beating heart. That's why the centrepiece of our $6 billion strengthening Medicare package was a $3.5 billion initiative to triple the bulk billing incentive, something the College of General Practitioners described as a game-changer for general practice, a game-changer for millions of mums and dads who want the confidence that they can take their sick kid to a bulk billed doctor, a game-changer for millions of pensioners. And, Mr Speaker, it will be a game-changer for the member for Gilmore's constituents on the south coast of New South Wales, 90,000 of whom are eligible for the increased bulk billed incentive. And, Mr Speaker, it will be a game-changer for towns like Nowra, where the total fee paid to a GP for a standard bulk billed consult will go up by 50%, 50% from $50 to $75. That's all part, Mr Speaker, of Labor's plan to strengthen Medicare.
Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In this House yesterday, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Wages are increasing under this government," end quote. But, Prime Minister, page 6 of the government's own budget paper number 1 shows real wages will fall by 2.25% this financial year. Are the Treasurer's budget papers wrong, or did the Prime Minister mislead the House?
The member for Holt is warned. Order. Members on my left and right. The member for McEwen is warned. Time is not to interject before any minister speaks. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm delighted to get a question from the opposition about wages, because there are two different positions. Those on that side of the chamber had low wages as a key feature of the economic architecture. They consciously wanted low wages. We on this side have said very clearly that we want to lift wages. We understand that wages are a part of people's living standards, and that's why I'll be very interested in what the response is to our aged care position. The $1.3 billion that is in the budget to lift the wages of aged care workers, 250,000 of them.
Order. Well,
you can't be serious.
The Prime Minister is talking about wages and who is getting increase in wages. So I'm going to ask him to pause, but out of respect for the Deputy Leader, I will take her point of order. But he could not be more relevant while he's talking about wages increase, which you specifically asked about.
Respectfully, Speaker, this is on relevance. The Prime Minister is not addressing
Order.
whether the budget papers misled the House or whether the Prime Minister misled the House.
Order. I'm just going to ask the Prime Minister to continue and not to be interrupted with his answer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm being totally relevant. No wonder they're concerned about the $11.3 billion package that we put in place to assist the wages of people in aged care. $11.3 billion, because what we've said very clearly, is that aged care workers deserve more than our thanks. They deserve a wage increase. That's what they deserve. And during the election campaign, I well recall I kept that lucky $1 coin in my pocket, Mr Speaker. I kept it in my pocket during the debate.
Minister for Skills.
During the debates, it's in the drawer. It is in the drawer. Thank you. Here it is. It's in the drawer.
Order.
And during the campaign, I thank the Minister for Infrastructure for once again being helpful.
Order.
Because during the campaign, I held up this $1 coin.
Order. The member for Deakin will resume his seat for a moment. The Prime Minister will pause as well. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Deakin will resume his seat. Just for a moment. Just ask the Prime Minister to pause. Member for Deakin, that is not appropriate to come to the dispatch box and say to someone to sit down. Okay? If you want to make a point of order, Prime Minister can pause. Under the standing orders, you're entitled to raise a point of order, and I'll hear your point of order. Order.
And Mr. Speaker,
on my left.
Mr. Speaker, it was a point of order, and when someone stands for a point of order, it's customary that the minister sits.
Order. And it's also customary to wait till you call before you do that.
Sure.
So continue on with your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst the Prime Minister is holding up a prop, he should tell the Australian people that that dollar is worth less now.
Resume your seat. Order. Members on my right and the left will cease interjecting. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy is warned. I'll hear from the order. Members on my right. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I refer to your previous rulings about points of order which are deliberately designed to disrupt, that are clearly not points of order, and also refer to the warnings you've been giving to that particular member over the last few days.
The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
And Mr Speaker, as you deliberate on this matter, I do remind you of the long-established prohibition on the use of props.
Just going to ask the Prime Minister to put the dollar coin away and continue with his answer.
Mr Speaker, they find the dollar coin offensive. You know what I find offensive? The fact that they thought a $1 an hour increase for people on the minimum wage would wreck the economy. That's what I find offensive. And that's why during the election campaign I held up that $1, because that said it all about the difference between Labor and the coalition. Those opposite will always stand up for those who don't need government to make a difference. Always there to say, let the market rip. Don't worry about helping people who need help. We on this side make no apologies for standing up for those people who are on the minimum wage. And I say to the Leader of the Opposition, you should have stayed outside for a bit longer because it wasn't going well.
Has concluded. Order. When the House is silent, I'll hear from the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to Treasurer. Treasurer, how has the Albanese Labor government begun the task of getting the budget back on track in its first 12 months, and how will it continue to strengthen the nation's finances for the benefit of all Australians?
Great question. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the member for Lingiari for her question, and also for the characteristically wise contribution you made to the debate earlier on today as well. Mr Speaker, a hallmark of the first year of the Albanese government has been responsible economic management, working through our challenges in a considered and methodical way. And a key achievement over the first two budgets of the government has been putting the nation's finances on a more sustainable footing. And our strategy has had three parts in both budgets: spending restraint, savings and modest but meaningful tax reform. And some examples of this, Mr Speaker. Over two budgets, we banked 87% of the upward revision to revenue, compared to the 40% banked by those opposite, the 30% banked by the Howard and Costello government. Real spending growth in the budget averaging just 0.6% on average over the forward estimates. We found $40 billion of savings and reprioritisations over two budgets, compared to precisely $0 in the March 22 budget handed down by those opposite. The net spend in our budget this time around was half as big as the last budget handed down by those opposite. And what this responsible, methodical approach means, Mr Speaker, is we are forecasting a small surplus this year, which would be the first in 15 years, and which represents a dramatic turnaround from the $78 billion deficit that was being forecast by those opposite. We have more than halved the cumulative deficits over the forward estimates, and we are reducing the forecast debt by around $300 billion over the decade. And this means that we avoid about $83 billion in interest costs alone. Now, none of this would be possible if we'd taken the approach of those opposite. If we'd spent like they did, and not banked like they did, we would have seen a deficit of around $40 billion this year instead of a small surplus. Now, Mr Speaker, we know the job isn't finished. We know that there's more to do. It will take more than two budgets. It will take more than one parliamentary term to clean up the mess that we inherited that was left to us by those opposite. And we know that a stronger budget isn't an end in itself. We weren't flogging back in black mugs on budget night like those opposite, because we know it's a foundation for the support that we want to give people who need it, a foundation for our investments in the future growth of our economy, and as a buffer against international uncertainty as well. This is not the time for the rorts and waste and mismanagement and incompetence which characterised the wasted decade. It's a time for responsible, methodical economic management, which has put the budget on a stronger footing for the future, and that's what we're providing.
Before I call the member for Indi, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are a delegation for the Vietnamese Canberra Fellowships Program, led by Dr Nguyen Hung Son. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you all, and also to His Excellency Mr Wolfgang Strohmayer, the Ambassador of Austria, is also with us today. I give the call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Our rural health workforce is so thin that both our hospitals and aged care services have no choice but to pay exorbitant agency and accommodation fees to employ and house doctors and nurses. Albury Wodonga Health spent $2.1 million last year on accommodation for locum workers, money that could be spent on patient care. How do you know that your budget measures will make a difference to the rural health workforce crisis?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. There's quite a wealth of experience and understanding of health issues on the crossbench now, none more so than the member for Indi's long experience in public health, and I value her advice and feedback. As she knows, as well as anyone in this space, the deep workforce shortages that are being experienced right across the health and aged care systems are most acute in rural and regional Australia. They are there in the cities, but they were there earlier, and they are more acute in rural and regional Australia, as I think everyone in this parliament understands to some degree. And we are determined to strengthen Medicare and work with state and territory colleagues for a hospital system and work, as the Aged Care Minister is doing, on aged care workforce for all Australians, including those Australians who live outside of our major cities. And I want to pay tribute to the work that the Assistant Minister for Rural Health, the member for Dobell, is doing on this. That work for us started in the October budget. We've never pretended that these issues will be fixed overnight, but we were determined to start work on them as quickly as we possibly could. We put in place additional workforce incentives for doctors, for example, with additional skills in emergency medicine, in mental health, in obstetrics. They started in our first budget last October. I thought they would have been supported by those opposite who were heckling. We also put in place additional incentives for nurse practitioners, which I'll come back to because they are such a great potential source of expert clinical work, particularly in rural Australia. We expanded rural training, as the member knows, including an expansion of the John Flynn program. And we reinstated the frankly inexplicable decision made by the former government to get rid of the bulk billing loading for telehealth psychiatry at a time when rural and regional Australia were benefiting from the benefits of technology. We're expanding the single employer model from one pilot project under the former government to 21. I only wrote yesterday to state and territory ministers for an additional 10 sites across Australia. And as I said in response to the member for Gilmore's question, the bulk billing incentives will be higher outside the major cities than they are in the major cities, which is why I think you saw the response from the Rural Doctors Association to our budget, which said, and I quote, "This budget has gone a long way to fixing the underinvestment in rural health and primary care over the past decade." But, Mr Speaker, I agree with the member for Indi. This is not going to happen overnight. The National Cabinet is seized of this issue. The National Cabinet asked the very eminent public servant Robin Kruk to undertake a comprehensive review of the recruitment and registration of overseas trained doctors and health professionals, which, as the member knows, are more important in rural communities than they are elsewhere. And as health ministers, we're working now on the implementation of that interim report.
The minister's time has concluded. The call to the honourable member for Parramatta.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese government strengthening Australia's relationship with India, and what were some of the outcomes of his meeting with Prime Minister Modi this morning?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Parramatta for his question. Indeed, it is a good thing that last night I announced the Centre for Australia-India Relations will be based in Parramatta. And we also, together with Prime Minister Modi, unveiled a plaque for the Little India Gateway, which will be there in Harris Park, one of the first Little Indias. Prime Minister Modi told me that will be anywhere in the world. It's a great celebration of our multiculturalism and a great celebration of who we are as a nation, one where we welcome people from around the world, but we encourage them, as well as to be loyal to Australia, to remember the heritage which they have. This morning I had a very warm and constructive meeting with Prime Minister Modi. It is our 6th meeting we've had since I became PM, and as Prime Minister Modi said, in the language of cricket, our ties have entered the T20 mode. We keep meeting very regularly indeed. And today we agreed to take the Australia-India Comprehensive Strategic Partnership to a new level in the next decade. We signed the terms of reference for the Australia-India Green Hydrogen Task Force, which will be so important for renewables. And we also witnessed the signing of the Australia-India Migration and Mobility Partnership Arrangement. Now, this is about promoting the exchange of students, graduates, researchers and business people, and also expanding our people-to-people ties and enhancing cooperation in preventing the evil scourge of people smuggling. I was also pleased to announce the establishment of a 5th Australian diplomatic presence in India, a Consulate General in Bengaluru, as well as to welcome India's plans for a Consul General in Brisbane. These processes are all so important in building relations with what is now the world's largest population of some 1.4 billion. And of those 1.4 billion, over 2/3 of them are under the age of 35. Under the age of 35. What that will mean is that the economic growth that will occur going forward as a result of having one of the world's youngest populations will drive that growth going forward, so that India will be the third largest economy in the world in our region. Of course, that presents a real opportunity for us to benefit in a mutual way from this relationship. I thank very much Prime Minister Modi for his visit. It has been well received by the diaspora here as well, and many members here were present there at the rather extraordinary event that took place at Homebush last night.
Indulgence, I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I join with the Prime Minister in thanking Prime Minister Modi and his delegation for visiting Australia, for paying honour to the relationship. The relationship with India when we were in government was quite extraordinary and productive. I want to acknowledge the work of former Prime Minister Morrison and many on the front bench, including Dan Tehan, who was intimately involved in trade negotiations and created the opportunities which, to the government's credit, they've continued in relation to a number of these announcements. I was late into question time because I'd been meeting with Prime Minister Modi in Sydney this morning. In a way, I wish the meeting had gone on a little longer. I would have avoided a bit more of question time, but it was a very cordial and engaging discussion. And the wide-ranging topics that we traversed gave an indication of the bipartisan support in the relationship, and Prime Minister Modi acknowledged that. It, of course, as the Prime Minister points out, followed on from quite an extraordinary event last night. There were lots of people in attendance from both sides of politics, but I said to the Prime Minister this morning that every politician there last night was jealous of the fact that he was able to get 20,000 people chanting his surname in unison on the other side of the world, mainly at Labor Party functions, yes. So I thought it was an extraordinary event, and I really acknowledge the work of the Indian community in hosting Prime Minister Modi. We have an amazing diaspora community, people who have contributed in many, many ways to our national life, and they are an integral part of not only the present-day Australia but into the future as well.
We call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. UBS research says the increasing rate of food inflation is a surprise, with grocery inflation likely to remain elevated. The Treasurer says that inflation is moderating. What is the Prime Minister's message to Australian families paying more at the checkout? Why are Australians paying more for the food they put at the table?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I thank the Shadow Treasurer for his question. I regret that the Treasurer is once again left out of the process. Well, the fact is that the Leader of the Opposition's budget reply exposed the Coalition's catastrophising about inflation and interest rates for what it was, another concocted scare campaign. Not only has the opposition backed most of the budget measures, they failed to come up with a single save. And of course they didn't have costings for the policies that they announced. Didn't have costings. And I'll tell you how you take pressure off inflation. You take pressure off inflation by turning what was a coalition-predicted $78 billion deficit into a projected $4.2 billion surplus. That's how you take pressure off inflation, by making difficult decisions, by banking most of the revenue gains which had been there, and by making sure that you hand down a responsible budget. That's what we did. And when we announced alternative policies, such as our childcare plan, We actually got them costed beforehand. We didn't have a circumstance whereby, for the one thing that was announced by the opposition leader, there were no costings whatsoever, no costings, and then there was of course no savings whatsoever. A bit like their 2022 budget, no savings whatsoever.
Give a call to the honourable member for Moreton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. What is the Albanese Labor government doing through the Quad partnership to support cable connectivity and network resilience in the Indo-Pacific?
Excellent. Give a call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Moreton for his question. And first, of course, I acknowledge the momentous visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi this week and the significance of the Australia-India relationship to the broader Indo-Pacific. Mr Speaker, both our countries appreciate the transformational power of ICT and the importance of cooperation in this area to support economic growth and development. The Albanese government is delivering a package of measures to respond to regional priorities and support our shared interests. Recently, Quad leaders reaffirmed their shared commitment to an open, stable and prosperous region. Leaders announced a package that delivers on the Quad's practical agenda and responds to the region's needs, including an outcome on undersea communications cables. Undersea cables are key to global growth, and to give the House a sense of that, they actually carry a greater value of trade through financial transactions and information than the value of goods carried at sea. And by virtue of their importance, they are also a source of strategic vulnerability. Mr Speaker, 95% of international data traffic in the Indo-Pacific is actually carried by undersea cable networks, so they are vital to enabling connectivity. To that end, our Prime Minister, with his counterparts, announced a new Quad partnership for cable connectivity and resilience last week. This will improve access to trusted and secure cable systems and establish better internet connectivity and resilience across the Indo-Pacific. The partnership will strengthen cable systems, drawing on the world-class expertise of Quad countries in manufacturing, delivering and maintaining that cable infrastructure. It will deepen connections between our people, support our development program investments in areas like health and education, and enhance cooperation across labour mobility, maritime security, policing, natural disaster responses, media, sport and telecommunications. This effort has been expertly led by our Foreign Minister, Defence Minister and the Minister for International Development and the Pacific. The Quad is also stepping up efforts to strengthen supply chain resilience and improve the region's digital connectivity through access to critical and emerging technologies, including 5G networks. The transformative power of technology, including digital public infrastructure, to support sustainable development in the Indo-Pacific and deliver economic and social benefits cannot be understated. And to this end, of course, I acknowledge the respective roles of the Ministers for Home Affairs and Industry in these important areas. As is evident, Mr Speaker, we are taking a whole-of-government approach to support this work and to ensure that countries in our region can access high-quality and reliable communications which drive economic and social development.
Call to the member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How many people smuggling boats has the government dealt with over the last 12 months?
Could be called to the Prime Minister.
I refer the member to the level of transparency that his government had when they were in office.
Give a call to the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker.
Order.
Hey.
Order. Members on my left.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Order.
Why has the Albanese Labor government rescoped the infantry fighting vehicle program following the Defence Strategic Review? What's been the response and how does this differ from the actions of former governments?
Call to order. The member for Forrest will cease interjecting. Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank
the member for his question and acknowledge his service in the Australian Army. The government has rescoped the procurement of the next generation of infantry fighting vehicles from 450 down to 129 vehicles.
Fisher will cease interjecting.
And this is being done in line with a recommendation of the Defence Strategic Review, and the process for managing the manufacture of those vehicles will now be handled by the Minister for Defence Industry. Now, this is obviously a difficult decision, and there are many who disagree with it, including, apparently, those opposite. But no one is suggesting that Australia's principal threat is an invasion of the continent. What we need is a nimble and mobile army, and it needs to be potent, so we need a number of those fighting vehicles, but we need to have the capacity to transport them, and which means that if we don't, we risk having hundreds of those vehicles stranded in Australia, and if we're not about to be invaded, what is the point of that? Now, they are the strategic reasons behind the hard decision that we have made, and that stands in stark contrast to the way defence policy was handled over most of the last decade, because the former government didn't do strategy and the former government was incapable of making a hard decision. When they spent money, they were completely out of control, which is why we saw 28 different programs running a combined 97 years over time. When there was a capability problem, the way they did business was through the bizarre mechanism of making announcements with nothing behind them, meaning there wasn't a dollar behind 1/4 of what defence needed to purchase. The only pressure those opposite responded to was political pressure, which is why we saw the unedifying spectacle of Australia's future submarine capability being tossed around the former government's party room in the empty chair challenge on Prime Minister Abbott. It's why they were in and out of a subs deal with Japan, in and out of a deal with France. It was only ever about the politics, which is why it is wholly unsurprising that the former government sunk to the depths of trying to use the Defence Force to raise money for the Liberal Party. Well, our government's only interest is the national interest, and we will continue to engage in strategic analysis and to make the hard decisions required to building the Defence Force that we need to keep Australians safe.
Give the call to the member for Nichols.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. I refer to the minister's response last year in question time that the money for the Shepparton bypass remains in the budget and we are fully committed to that project. Does the minister stand by her statement, or will the Shepparton bypass fall victim to her infrastructure review?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, the member, for the question, and I know he is a strong advocate for this project. Can I say to the member that every single dollar of the $120 billion 10-year pipeline remains in the budget. It was in the budget 2 weeks ago, and it remains in the budget, and it will remain in the budget going forward. Every single dollar.
Members on my
left.
But
the mess we have been left with, and the problem.
Order. The minister will pause. I can't hear a word the minister is saying. The next person who interjects will leave the chamber. The minister is going to be heard in silence for the remainder of her answer. Give her the call.
And the member points to a project that actually illustrates the problem that we have been left with. After 10 years, frankly, of mismanagement of this pipeline, putting political priorities above deliverability, making announcements when you didn't know how much a project was going to cost, you didn't have a funding partner, doing it without actually working with state governments to actually see whether these projects could be delivered, we are now left with a pipeline full of over 800 projects, many of which cannot simply be delivered. So we are cleaning up the mess that you have left, those opposite left, to make sure that we can actually deliver projects rather than just keep promising them and promising them and promising them. We actually want to build them.
Give the call to the member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. What questions remain unanswered arising from the Watt review into contracts and procurements?
Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services. Member for Paterson.
Members of the House will recall that late last year and again this year there have been disturbing reports in the Age and Sydney Morning Herald about the undeclared but very active relationship between de facto Canberra lobbying firm Synergy 360 and the outgoing member for Fadden. Following these articles, the heads of my agencies initiated an inquiry. The inquirer, Dr Watt, identified 19 contracts worth $374 million requiring further examination. He explained that the review only had the ability to look at one side of the contracts, that of the public officials, but not of the vendors, former ministers, MPs or their officers. Subsequently, the member for Bruce has chaired the JCPAA and looking at these most concerning matters. But a common thread across the undisclosed conflicts of interest, valuable government contracts and Synergy 360 and special access is the outgoing member for Fadden. He's tendered his resignation, but crucial questions remain unanswered. What role did the member for Fadden play in coaching commercial interests seeking special access to Commonwealth contracts? Did the member for Fadden supply the same insider knowledge of government to any other of his 100,000 constituents? Did the member for Fadden ever, directly or indirectly, seek to or receive a financial benefit from Synergy 360? Is there still a potential benefit owed to him? What is the member for Fadden's previous and current interest in the Australian Property Trust? Is he the beneficiary of any other trust or structures controlled by individuals linked to Synergy 360? What agreement did the member for Fadden and his fundraiser, John McGarrison, have in relation to profits derived from Synergy 360? There's a further report in today's Age and Sydney Morning Herald that notes it's not just the government who feels there are questions to be answered. Eminent legal professionals believe these matters need to be looked into by an investigative body with the power to compel evidence and witnesses. Justice Anthony Wheely, KC, Stephen Charles, KC, Clancy Moore, Chief Executive of Transparency International Australia, Jeffrey Watson, SC, all agree that the actions and the issues around this warrant further investigation. I note in closing the member for Fadden has unusually said that he won't come to Parliament to deliver a valedictory speech because he considers it a vanity project. Not even a thank you to his electors. I do not believe that these actions are the way that 98% of the people in this House conduct themselves, but I do believe that the member for Fadden owes the people and his coalition colleagues, he owes all of those opposite an explanation as to what he did and why he did it.
Order. Give the call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Your budget spends a staggering $313 billion on Labor's Stage 3 tax cuts for the wealthy, giving politicians and billionaires $9,000 a year, but has nothing for 5.5 million renters who don't get Commonwealth rent assistance. In the middle of a rental crisis, why is Labor spending $313 billion on tax cuts for politicians and billionaires but can't find $1.6 billion a year to fund the Greens' plan for a rent freeze?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I say respectfully to the Leader of the Greens that if he cared about social and affordable housing, he'd vote for it. And if he cared about the pressure that people are under in the housing market, he would put his money where his mouth is in the Senate and support the Housing Australia Future Fund. But as members on this side of the House are aware, that's not the only part of what is a broad and ambitious policy agenda that we have when it comes to housing. And I pay tribute to the Housing Minister and all of the colleagues for the substantial amount of attention and investment that housing gets in our budget. I was proud to announce from this dispatch box a little over 2 weeks ago, Mr Speaker, that there would be new tax breaks, for example, for build-to-rent properties, so that we can build somewhere between 150,000 to 250,000 new homes over the next 10 years, according to the industry. Because the big issue in the rental market, as I do believe the Leader of the Greens understands, is supply. We don't have enough homes. We need to build more homes. That's what the Housing Australia Future Fund is all about, It's what the Housing Accord is all about. It's what the tax breaks for build to rent are all about. It's about lifting the NIFIC cap for community housing providers is all about. At the same time, as the budget provided for the biggest increase in Commonwealth rent assistance for 3 decades. So, Mr Speaker, we have a housing agenda which is broad and ambitious. We want to see it pass the parliament. The Greens have an opportunity to vote for social and affordable housing in the Senate. The time has come, Mr Speaker, for an end to the ambit claims and the political games that are being played in the Senate when it comes to social and affordable housing. There are people who are counting on this place to pass the necessary legislation to build tens of thousands of new homes, including for women and kids fleeing violence. We want to see those homes built. We need the assistance and the support of the Senate in order to make that possible.
Give a call to the member for Paterson.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How has the Albanese Labor government acted to shield Australians from the worst of the global energy crisis? And what will this mean for energy bills? And what approaches has the government rejected?
Give a call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her question and recognise her leadership as a strong regional voice in this parliament, ensuring that our regions benefit from the clean energy revolution underway. Now, Mr Speaker, the honourable member asked about what we have done to shield Australians from rising energy prices, and as she will recall, in December this government intervened, and we intervened again in the budget, and as a result, the figures show in our home state of New South Wales, energy prices which were projected to rise by 40%. For those who received the rebates, they've fallen by 5%. In Queensland, energy prices were projected to rise by 43%. They've fallen by 10%. Or in South Australia, it's another example. They were projected to rise by 51%. And they've fallen by 5%, Mr Speaker, for those who received the rebate. So that's the result of this government's intervention. And of course, this was opposed by those opposite. The shadow treasurers tried to say that they were for it, but the Leader of the Opposition, to give him credit, has cleared that up. He's cleared that up. He was at the APIA conference last week. He was railing against the government's intervention. He was railing against our policies, and he promised to repeal them. Repeal the gas and coal cap, repeal the Code of Conduct, repeal safeguards. Not sure about PRRT, but he was dead against it, Mr Speaker. He was promising to repeal it all. He told us he was inspired by Reagan. Inspired by Reagan, Mr Speaker. He was channeling his inner Reagan. I'm not sure which Reagan. I suspect it might be Nancy. Remember, just say no, she said. Nancy Reagan was just say no, and he's inspired by Nancy Reagan's approach. But I give credit where it's due. We're always fair. The Leader of the Opposition has been outlining a bit of policy. We saw a bit of policy in his budget reply, a little bit. He doubled down on the member for Fairfax's plan for nuclear energy for Australia. He backed it in. It wasn't so much Reaganomics, it was Duttonomics.
Order.
He didn't have any costings. I mean, a small modular reactor will cost $5 billion. The Leader of the Nationals has called for Liddell to be replaced by a nuclear reactor. That would cost $35 billion, Mr Speaker. You know, Ronald Reagan, they had no cost. I'm happy to provide them. I'm just assisting those opposite who haven't provided any costings because they've got a thought bubble about nuclear energy. This is Duttonomics. The answer to higher power prices now, in his idea, is to introduce the most expensive form of energy and the slowest form of energy. Ronald Reagan had trickle-down economics. The Leader of the Opposition's got scribble-down policies.
Order. Members on my right. I want to hear from the member for Banks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In my household, as in many other Australian households, footy time is family time. But this time is being encroached upon by the corrosive influence of sports betting advertising during the broadcasting of games. As announced in the Leader of the Opposition's budget reply speech, a coalition government would move to ban sports betting advertising during the broadcasting of games. Will the Prime Minister work with the opposition to get this initiative implemented now?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. No one likes their footy more than me. More than me, Mr. Speaker. Although I didn't enjoy last Friday night, it must be said.
Order.
The member for Parramatta. Look, we on this side of the House do want to protect people from gambling harm, and that's why we've already made real progress. And in April, Ministers Rishworth and Rowland announced that we'll be having a ban on credit cards for online wagering, something that was never done by those opposite. Never done by those opposite. We're introducing BetStop in the third quarter of this year so people can exclude themselves from online gambling. Again, something never done by those opposite there. We are concerned about gambling ads, and that's why I find them frankly annoying, as do, I think, most people who are trying to watch the footy. But they want...
The Leader of the Opposition will sit...
If only they were in government sometime in the last decade, Mr. Speaker. If only they'd had the opportunity to do something, to act. Well, what we have done is establish a House of Reps inquiry, not just into
Member for Casey is warned.
Into ads on TV, but also take into account social media and branding, not just live TV. A comprehensive inquiry is underway, something that the Leader of the Opposition apparently is not aware of. We've also held the first meeting of State and Territory Ministers responsible for gambling harm reduction since 2017. They didn't even have a discussion about any of these issues, not in 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 or 22. Nothing. The Coalition had 9 years to act on ban ads during sport, but they didn't. And the only reason there are any restrictions on gambling ads during live sport is because of actions that Labor has taken. We will await the inquiry that looks at a comprehensive response, because that is what is appropriate.
Call to the honourable member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How will the Albanese Labor government's reforms for affordable early childhood education make a difference for Australian families, build a stronger economy and lay the foundations for a better future for Australian children?
Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lyons for his question. Actually, it was quite fantastic to be in the member for Lyons electorate recently in Sorell and visiting the Bridgewater Connected Beginnings site, talking to community members there about the importance of the early years in a child's life and about our changes to make early learning more affordable for families in Australia. Changes that are laying the foundations for a better future. In the great Labor tradition of social and economic reforms, reforms like Medicare, like superannuation, like paid parental leave, and building on the Labor legacy that brought in the National Quality Framework for Early Childhood Education and Care. Our changes are good for children, they are good for families, and they are reforms that are good for the economy, Mr Speaker. They will boost productivity, boost women's workforce participation, and they will give parents more choice. From July 1st, over 1 million Australian families, 1.2 in fact, will benefit from more affordable early childhood education and care, because we know that the cost of early learning has often put it out of reach for many families. This is responsible cost of living relief that will make a real difference to family households right across the country. And, Mr Speaker, we're making these changes because we believe that every child, no matter who they are, no matter where they live, no matter who their parents are, should be able to benefit from access to good quality early learning. Now, we know that in the first 5 years of a child's life, a child's brain develops more and faster than any other time in their life. And you can see it. You can see it when you go to one of these early learning centres and you sit with the beautiful children there. And we want to make sure, and we're doing that, we're making sure that every child can learn, can grow and can thrive. We're looking comprehensively at how our early childhood sector operates, commissioning the Productivity Commission and the ACCC to undertake reviews. Now, both these reviews are consulting widely with sector organisations, including organisations like the Grain Growers Australia, who I met with yesterday over breakfast to discuss the unique needs of rural and regional families. And they told me about the importance of accessibility and flexibility in early childhood education and care. Australia now has a government that has made early learning a priority and is working to deal with the issues that have been ignored for way too long. Mr Speaker, we're proud of what we've achieved in this first year, but there's much more work to do and we're getting on with the job.
Give the call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Infrastructure. Minister, gas extraction from the Beetaloo Basin will detonate a 1.4 billion tonne carbon bomb. The Northern Territory Chief Minister and our Federal Climate Minister admitted last week that jurisdictions outside the Territory will have to help offset those emissions. Can you please inform the House which jurisdictions will be lifting that load and exactly how will they be doing it?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure.
It's to the wrong minister, so I'm just wanting to propose. Do we want to just get the correct minister up? Or there's an answer to be given, but it's just been asked to the wrong minister.
The minister is entitled to address the issue and then may refer part of the question or the remainder of the question to another minister who is responsible under the standing orders.
Thanks very much for the question. That actually is a question to Minister Bowen, and I will ask Minister Bowen to answer the question.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition. That comment is not appropriate, and I'm going to just move on, and I'm going to ask the minister. Order. Can I just ask the minister to continue with the answer?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for the question. I thank the Minister for Infrastructure for quite rightly referring it to me, because in this government we have one Minister for Energy who is responsible for these matters. Now, Mr Speaker, in relation to the honourable member's question, our safeguard reforms, which I acknowledge the honourable member supported, make it clear that Scope 1 emissions from any shale gas extraction must be net zero. That's reflected in the safeguard rules that I brought down. In addition, in relation to Beetaloo, this government is 100% committed to recommendation 9.8 of the PEPA review. I've indicated that as late as last week on Darwin Radio, which is I think what the honourable member is indicating, that we remain committed to that recommendation. I would have thought that's a very sensible thing to do because it was an important recommendation. I have indicated that that has cross-jurisdictional implications because there are substantial emissions involved. There are substantial emissions involved, and to properly ensure that that obligation is met, it is appropriate for the Climate and Energy Ministers' Council to consider the cross-border ramifications as to where the gas is sent and where it is emitted and how it should be offset, and I've referred it to the Ministerial Council for further consideration.
The call to the member for Fraser.
My question is to the Minister for Cyber Security. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to clean up the mess left by the former government in cyber security?
Give a call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Cyber Security.
Speaker, thank you. And I want to thank my good friend, the member for Fraser, and thank him for his very commendable representation of his local community. Speaker, cyber security is something that affects every single one of our constituents. It is also one of the most important national security challenges that faces our government. And so it was a great pity for us to arrive in government a year ago to find that cyber security was in an absolute mess. We had voluntary cyber obligations, which barely anyone was meeting. We had a response across government which was completely uncoordinated. We had no meaningful cyber incident response function within the Australian government. Absolutely unbelievable. And it's not surprising, Speaker, because under the former government we didn't even have a minister for cybersecurity. So it's not surprising that we ended up where we are. Mr Speaker, the opposition are a bit sensitive about this because they're probably aware that the opposition leader was ostensibly responsible for this during his time as Home Affairs Minister. Right. And I can share with the parliament that he did not once during his tenure as Home Affairs Minister mention the word ransomware in the Australian parliament. Not a single time when he was the minister.
Order.
And Speaker, this was at a time when this problem was costing the Australian economy $1 billion a year. Now, Speaker, our Prime Minister has changed all that, and this has led to a very large volume of action on behalf of us as a government. We're taking a very different and a highly active approach. In this first year, that has included setting up Hack the Hackers, a 100-strong task force of Australian Federal Police and Australian Signals Directorate operators who are hacking back at the criminals who are seeking to harm Australians. Australia.
I just asked the Minister to pause, and I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Just on relevance, we had committed $9.9 billion to the ASD.
Resume your seat. That is an abuse of the standing orders. The Minister was up. Order. The Minister will just pause. I'm just going to return back to the question and give her the call.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. I was asked about cybersecurity, and I'm talking about cybersecurity and the dismal failures of the former government on this issue. Speaker, Australia in the last year has taken on global leadership of the Counter-Ransomware Initiative. We are building global cooperation to fight the cyber criminals who are attacking not just us, but many other countries with whom we share close relationships. Speaker, our government has declared 82 systems of national significance. We've delivered $20 million to make sure that those critical assets are protected through the Cyber Infrastructure and Security Centre. We have imposed tough new ground rules for cybersecurity across 11 major sectors in the economy, and for the first time we are bringing coordination to the work of government. We're developing, in close collaboration, a cybersecurity strategy that is going to be really important to making sure that we meet our desire to be the most cyber-safe country in the world by 2030. And, Speaker, tomorrow we will begin a program of national cyber exercises which will bring together all the actors in the economy to help protect our country. Speaker, cybersecurity is national security. We arrived in government to fix the mess, and we're doing it, but there's a lot more work to be done. Thank you.
The Manager of Opposition is on point of order.
Mr Speaker, I ask that the Minister table the document from which she read word for word in that answer.
Look, we can continue to do this each time, but was the Minister reading from confidential documents? Order, as is a long-standing practice. Order. Order. The member for Boothby. Give the call to the member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Can the Minister confirm how Australia will safely dispose of nuclear waste from the new AUKUS submarines?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for his question, and it is a very important question. As we have made clear, in the announcement of the optimal pathway by which Australia will acquire a nuclear-powered submarine capability that we made in March, part of that pathway is to be accountable for the full cycle, the full nuclear cycle, including the disposal of the reactor at the end of its life. And the safe disposal of that has been an important commitment that we've made to the International Atomic Energy Agency as part of making clear that Australia will meet its obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, we have made clear in our announcement that we will embark on a process by which we will determine how the place of disposal and the means of disposal will be chosen. We have time to do that because obviously the first reactor that we would face needing to dispose of is not needing to be done for decades. But it is important that we get this process in place, and we will do so in the time frame that we've already articulated.
Give the call to the member for Newcastle. Order.
My question is to the Minister for Education. What action has the Albanese Labor government taken to make our schools better and fairer?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the sensational member for Newcastle for her question. I announced a few weeks ago that 10 schools in her electorate would get funding from round one of the Schools Upgrade Fund, amongst 1,300 schools right across the country that will get funding for everything from iPads and laptops to air conditioners to outdoor learning areas. And that's just the start. There's more to come. I can advise members that round two will open later this year. There's also funding in the budget to help to encourage more young people to become teachers and keep the fantastic teachers that we've got. And that includes university scholarships worth up to $40,000 to encourage our best and brightest young people to leap out of school and want to be a teacher rather than a banker or a lawyer or, God forbid, a politician. And applications for that open later this year as well. We've also got to do a better job of preparing teaching students to become teachers. Ask most teachers and they'll tell you they never really felt prepared when they left university, that prac wasn't up to scratch, that the practical experience they got when they were a student wasn't really enough, that university didn't give them everything they needed to teach children to read or write or manage a disruptive classroom. Fixing that's important. I think I've told the House before that up to 50% of teachers quit in the first 5 years. And this, what's happening at university, is a big part of that. So when education ministers meet in the next few weeks, we'll look at the reforms that we need to make to fix teacher training. We'll also look at two other things that cause problems in our schools. And if you're a parent of a school-aged child, then I suspect you'll know what I'm talking about. Mobile phones and vaping. They're not at school yet, Barnaby, but they will be soon. If you're focused on your phone, then you're not focused on the teacher and so you're not learning. Some states have banned phones in schools, others are thinking about it. At the next meeting with education ministers, I'll put on the table a proposal for a consistent national approach to the banning or restriction of mobile phones by students in our schools. And on vaping, ask any parent with a child in high school, Member for McMahon tells me about this all the time, and they'll tell you they're worried about it. Catherine as well. Principals will tell you it's a behaviour issue, and it is blindingly obvious that the companies that make these things are targeting school students. Fancy flavours like bubble gum, designed to look like USBs and highlighters that you can hide in a pencil case. And remember, these things include the sort of chemicals you'll find in weed killer or bug spray. That's why parents are worried about it. That's why I want to thank the Health Minister for his leadership on this, getting rid of the flavours, getting them out of convenience stores, helping to get them out of our schools. So we're focused on the things that teachers and parents and students are worried about, but also the big reforms that we need to make to build a better and a fairer education system.
Call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. On that note, I'd ask further questions be placed on the notice paper.
The Minister for the National Disability Order. The Minister for the National Disability Insurance and the Minister for Government Services has indicated he is seeking the call on indulgence, and I give him the call.
Yesterday at 1:30 p.m. at a Services Australia centre at Airport West, a Centrelink team leader was stabbed by an assailant while doing her job. This is a terrible crime committed against a well-respected, well-loved, experienced public servant. This morning I travelled to Melbourne to visit the Airport West Service Centre. I met many amazing but traumatised co-workers who were present yesterday and others who were there today to support their colleagues. I know the House joins me in expressing shock at this incident. We send our thoughts to the staff member who was injured, her family and the staff and customers who witnessed this assault. The officer is receiving the best of care and we wish her a speedy recovery. My thanks to both the immediate assistance provided by other staff and the Victorian Police who attended within 5 minutes. It's a very sad and terrible day for Services Australia and our Commonwealth Public Service and people who work for government at all levels. Public servants do an important and difficult job for people in their local community, many of whom are stressed or vulnerable or have complex problems. But that is no excuse. Customer aggression and antisocial behaviour will not be tolerated ever. No one who works for our public service on the front line should ever be concerned for their personal safety. They all have a right to go home safely. I want to assure that the staff at service centres that the Albanese government has taken this matter most seriously. Today we're establishing a review of service centre security to be led by Graham Ashton, AM, APM, former Chief Commissioner of the Victoria Police and Deputy Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police. The terms of reference will examine what we can do to better prevent and deter future incidents. This review will be carried out as a priority. The impact of this terrible incident on staff is obvious. Some were too distressed to return to frontline work today. I think it is important, and I briefly mentioned this to the Shadow Minister, that this parliament expresses its support for all of our public servants, in particular the person who was assaulted yesterday.
And I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
The opposition joins with the government in expressing our very deep concern about this deeply regrettable incident. We express our sympathy for the staff member who was attacked. We express our sympathy and concern for all of that frontline staff members' colleagues, and we absolutely endorse the statement that no public servant should face the danger of violence in doing the essential work they are doing to serve our community.
I present the Auditor-General's Performance Audit Report No. 25 of 2022-23, entitled Governance of the Tiwi Land Council, Tiwi Land Council, and call the Leader of the House with papers.
Thanks, Speaker. These documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.
Members can take their seats or leave the chamber as quickly as possible. I received a letter from the honourable member for Hume proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely this government's